spiritual elements of place. And I just want to share that because I believe that our panelists, I think that question pretty much share that perspective. And that is so fundamental to what we're talking about vis-a-vis regenerative travel. And so with that, and Andrea, you'll be first up for this question for us. Question for each of the first question for each of the panelists, and they take about 2 minutes, hopefully, each of you. What does regenerative tourism mean to you? How is this different from sustainable tourism? And what does it look like in practice in the context of your work? So Andrea, let's give you the first crack.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. You know, for us in Colorado, we think of regenerative travel really as being the next level. And in fact, Gregory, you just said it perfectly. It really is the holistic view of what sustainable travel is. So we started, and in fact, we were one of the first states to partner with an organization called Leave No Trace here in the United States to start looking at the health and wellness of everything from the environment. What we also do as we look at this, we also look, and especially since COVID and everything has happened, we're also looking at the health of our residents. So it's a really big view of being sustainable. We want this planet to be here in the exact shape it is for future generations. We want to make that better. So we're offering, and I know we have a question on it later, but we're offering itineraries that include things like volunteerism, how you can help when you come to the state, which we're discovering a lot of travelers are looking for as ways that they can also pitch in. You know, but then on the next level, how do our residents feel about it? So, you know, we've got a lot of destinations who are doing really great things in literally making the planet a better place and making us all better people.
Terrific. Appreciate that, Andrea. And I'm happy and proud to say that I am a certified Leave No Trace trainer and have been for many years. So I'm happy to hear not so Colorado. Felipe, if we could go to you and get your perspective, please, on that question.
Yes. So for us, regenerative tourism is combining sustainable tourism with the social enterprise model, and with the goal, the explicit goal of generating positive impact at local level. In practice, so right now we are a platform that specializes in sustainable tourism across Latin America. We put local tour operators who follow our guidelines and our responsible tourism policy in touch with conscious travelers from all over the world who want a tailor-made itinerary in any of the destinations that we offer. In practice, we're talking about a network of empowered local communities that are using tourism for local development, environmental conservation, and cultural preservation. And currently, we have more than 200 communities in our network, and beyond the commercial aspect, beyond the promotion that we make so they can host tourists, we also work on raising the visibility that they have in the media, in the digital arena. So, for instance, our blog often features some of the work that these communities are doing, and we have sent several journalists from big newspapers like The Guardian to several of these communities. So those articles can be used as promotion for sustainable tourism, community-based tourism, and ultimately regenerative tourism.
That's terrific, Felipe. And before we started the panel, went live, the panelists have agreed to post as appropriate any particular resource information, URL links, etc. So please, all participants, please make note of that and take advantage of that, because these are extraordinary resources for all of us, frankly. Glenn, let me jump over to you down in Ticolandia and get your perspective on this question, please.
Okay, well, I think there's a lot of conversation and even confusion about what all these terms mean: ecotourism, sustainable tourism, regenerative tourism, responsible tourism, and they're all kind of bound up into the same ball of consideration, of hope, of dreams, of business. But in the past, and for the last, at least in my case, for the last 30 plus years, we've been involved in what we've been calling sustainable tourism, which by the very meaning of the word sustainable tends to or inclines one towards sustaining or maintaining something. And I think the term regenerative tourism becomes much more woke and current because we're past that point of sustaining. We're now into the realm of needing to regenerate. And I like to use that term because besides the good practices and the tendency for persuading our travelers to go to places that are nature-based and what we would ultimately call ecotourism, I think we also need to find places that are acting proactively in terms of regenerating what they're doing, reforestation, compensation for carbon footprint, increasing the well-being for indigenous communities, things like that. So what we need to do is stop in some point thinking too much about terminology and starting to think about how we can go backwards into recreating and regenerating the things that we think are important in our planet and in our businesses, which are tourism based.
Terrific. If I may sort of interject for a moment, and I would raise this for all the panelists to think about as we proceed in the panel, is to kind of take what Glenn has proposed, and Andrea, for example, think in the context of Colorado and the Front Range, and the tremendous opportunities there, and think about what those measures that matter are whether it's sustainable tourism, regenerative tourism. It's what is it we are trying to maintain, change, improve, and such. And I think that's something overall that we're all both struggling with and does present an opportunity. So Kyle, let's jump over to you, and please, if we could get your perspective.
Yeah, and thank you all for having me. So as I was introduced, I'm Kyle, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Kateca. And at Kateca, we basically connect local guides and operators in emerging markets with the world's travelers. Similar to Sumac, we also have a marketplace that does that really effectively in 18 countries throughout Latin America. But we also build software that's specifically designed for local guides and operators in emerging markets that allows them to get wider distribution, in ways that we see operators and guides being able to do in developed markets or have been able to do for decades now. And so when we think about regenerative tourism, we think of it as tourism that leaves a place and a community and a people better than, once a visitor visits, it leaves that place better than it was when they found it, right? Or when they encountered it for the first time. And so that means that we see each visitor into the communities that we work with, or that goes with one of the guides that we work with in these emerging markets, as almost like an investor or a stakeholder in that community or in that small business. And that just by patronizing those businesses and those organizations or doing those tours and visiting those communities, they're actually helping those communities invest in themselves. And so part of that does play into sustainability in terms of maintaining the environment, but it also should go beyond just maintaining the environment. It should go towards expanding, right, the positive impact, and creating and treating tourism as something that can have a positive impact to allow those local economies and local communities to grow, right, in a very significant and positive way.
Terrific, Kyle, thanks. There's something I've heard specifically, if I can, Glenn mentioned, which I would like to kind of, before we go to the next question, I'd like to get a little deeper engagement with our panelists on, and that is, how does Indigenous tourism fit into regenerative travel? Think about it for a moment from your perspectives. For example, Felipe and Kyle, in terms of tourism operators, I was working yesterday with on looking at some planning with the Indigenous Tourism Organization for Ontario, Canada, and they're the biggest in Canada in terms of overall business applications, and it's a very important element. Andrea, I wanted to start with you because, of course, Colorado has Native American populations, and is this something that is featuring in your kind of perspective? And then I wanted to kind of see what your perspective was first on that, and then just open it up to the other gentlemen quickly and get a little more flavor on this element, if we could, on Indigenous tourism and regenerative travel and how they may or may not mesh.
So what we find, and I'm going to speak specifically to the international groups just for this specific conversation, but we actually find that a lot of people, especially when they're coming to the Southwestern United States, where Indigenous travel is a much larger piece of what we do, we're finding much more increase in renewed interest. It's not only the interest in the Indigenous history, but there's also a sense that people are trying to find their own spirituality right now, especially with the current crisis that we've been going through. It's a very careful approach, and we've been working more and more with some of the Indigenous people. Several of our national monuments and one of our national parks are actually sacred tribal lands. So it's working with them, finding them as guides so they can tell the accurate and the complete story, while at the same time, you have to be careful of these lands because they are sacred spaces. So it's a really delicate balance, but we find working with the tribes themselves, they're more than happy to help, and they really truly want to tell their story, and they want to help people find this path also to spirituality and just understanding how sacred these spaces are.
Great. I thought as much, and I wanted to make sure I didn't give you guys a heads up that was a question coming, but I thought it's spot on. Guys, any thoughts from your perspectives, either from the business or obviously down in application from Glenn? Just raise your hand we don't need everybody to chime in. I just wanted to make sure you had an opportunity. Kyle?
Yeah, I think that it's a really good point. And I think that Indigenous groups actually play a really huge role in the regenerative travel movement and sustainable travel for that matter. Mainly because I think that and I think you find across the board, and this is not true with every Indigenous group, around the world, and even throughout Latin America or within one country, like Panama, for example. But for the most part, you find that in Indigenous groups, Indigenous communities are very good stewards of their environment and of the areas around them, because they depend on them for a livelihood, and they understand that they don't want to destroy their community or their forest or the natural flora and fauna that exists around them. And I think that that's also a very strong resource for tourism, right? People want to visit places that haven't been decimated, by deforestation or mining or things like that. And so it's a really positive resource for them, and I think it's also a way for them to easily, be able to attract, conscious travelers to their areas and create a boom for their own economies, and also support the sustaining of their culture, right? And continuing to teach their culture and their languages to their children, because it's not only because it's just something that they cherish, but it's also something that other people are finding value and interest in.
And certainly, if I may, and then I'll go to you, Glenn. One of the things that we've certainly seen, and I've seen over my career, working throughout actually Latin America and the Caribbean, most countries and many Indigenous groups, is that there is a really a disparate inequity in terms of access to wealth, ability to conduct a fair business for ecotourism or cultural tourism or whatever. And part of, I think, the regenerative process or regenerative travel is also just that authenticity that I'm hearing you all mention. Glenn, let's go to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all really good points, and it's an important topic, particularly with the rural community tourism all over the world. And these are cultures that vary tremendously from not just from country to country, but sometimes from region to region within a country. And I think what's important is that in the tourism sector, that we consider the gentrification factor that goes on with indigenous peoples, which is like in an urban neighborhood in Brooklyn or in the Masai Mara, you have a kind of a tendency sometimes for tourism professionals to take on the role of being the professor, maestro, and showing the people what their business plan is. But those business plans are often rooted deeply in cultural prejudices and lifestyle choices and many other factors that may have an adverse effect on the actual economic growth of those communities while they protect their culture and their traditions. So you need to, I think it's really important to look at successful indigenous projects that have not only injected income into those communities, but also maintained their culture and traditions. The one that comes to mind for me is in the Masai Mara. It's called Negwesi Lodge. Really an amazing place. And they've done a very good job and had very good trainers to help them develop that over many, many years. It must be over 20 years now that they've been operating. So I think it's really important that indigenous well-being be taken into account in all tourism, but it also requires a great deal of sensitivity and inclusion for those communities and a participation rather than a leadership role.
Great, thank you. Felipe, I didn't want to leave you out. Do you have anything you wanted to add? Otherwise, I want to give you space.
Thank you. Yes, indigenous tourism is essential for us. It's an important part in our offer. We think it's necessary that they do tourism in their own terms, that they have their own structures to manage how they present their culture, how they host tourists. In terms of linking to regenerative tourism, what we're seeing is that their spiritual and wellness activities or offer are slowly becoming a product of regenerative tourism, that they're seeing this as an opportunity to innovate in their offer. And as you said before, there is a demand for this. Many travelers are looking for spiritual and wellness activities when they visit rural communities.
Mm-hmm. And I think, and I know Glenn is very involved in this, as perhaps some of the partners of each of you, is also the importance of agriculture tourism, and the importance of regenerating native crops, the culinary regeneration as part of customs in a variety, any place you go, frankly, is very important. So this is terrific. And Glenn, if I could, before we move on to our next question, would you mind please posting, giving Robin that link for the example that I think that would be helpful for everyone. Let me switch gears a little bit with the panel. And obviously all of us are still deep in the throes of responding to the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And we are all trying to adapt individually, collectively, from an economic, health perspective, you name it. And so my question for each of the panelists is, what have been some of the adaptations that you have made to your business model? And of course, each of you has a different perspective on this, to respond to COVID-19. And how do you think this will affect the industry long term, either positively or negatively? And again, Andrea, we'll start with you, please.
What hasn't changed? So for us as a destination, we're a little bit different than the other people on the call, just because our marketing plans, of course, we're always reaching out to audiences all throughout the world to try to get them to come to Colorado. And it's an interesting position to be in right now where you want to keep people aware of Colorado, but at the same time, we only want to feel like we're in a position where we're promoting tourism to our state in particular, but tourism as a whole, when it is safe for everybody to do so. The safety of our residents, I would say, especially in some of the really small mountain towns where they may not have the hospitals that we have in some of the urban areas, is huge. An influx of tourism in some of these cities could actually be very dangerous to the people there. But we also want to make sure that the tourists, when they come here, are safe as well. What I will say, as far as messages that are going out right now, wellness is the key. And that's actually what people want to hear about is how are we being safe? How wellness is a factor. They want to come somewhere and, wellness, I say sustainability, but really, again, that sustainability has moved to regeneration. And we really get the sense that tourists, they do want to pitch in now. How can they make things better? So, coming up with those opportunities for them, just, again, making sure everybody's safe while we do it. The residents, the tourists, it has really changed everything. And from an international perspective, of course, we can't accept international tourists without a 14-day quarantine at this point. We're also planning ahead as to what is that going to look like when we can begin promotion and when tourists actually can, and it's actually not a Colorado thing, when can people come into the United States again, is really the big question. But when we do it, how do we do it safely?
Absolutely. That's really helpful, Andrea, and good luck on that, continuing to strike that balance. Felipe, let's go to you in terms of, from your perspective, from Sumac and your constituents.
So the hardest hit by the pandemic were our local tour operators, those partners that we have in each country that actually deal with the customers' requests. As a platform, we have low overheads, so we were not hit that bad. And what we did was to use this time to create new products in every country. So no bookings, no travelers. We started to create new itineraries that we've been uploading into the platform. Focusing on highlighting those aspects that we think are going to be important post-pandemic, like private tours instead of small group tours, the tailor-made aspect, the personalization level. Hopefully, travelers will stop looking for big groups or big hotels for their holidays or their vacations. And this is something that we already do, but we don't highlight it enough. Obviously, we're also working on all the protocols, making sure that the communities we work with, every supplier or provider, they are on top of these health requirements.
Great, that's really helpful, Felipe. Glenn, let's drill down a bit. Well, of course, you wear a couple of hats here, and being an operator locally in Costa Rica, as well as heading the Global Ecotourism Network, which I've been a long-standing fan of. So, if you would be happy to share your insight on this.
Well, thank you. We, of course, like almost every business, I'm sure, in the world, has been involved with the protocols for trying to keep our visitors safe and our employees, our staff safe. I think, like many people in the world of ecotourism, our staff are like a family to us, and we feel very responsible for them, and both economically and physically and spiritually. So we're trying to make their lives also more advantageous in terms of dealing with the COVID financially and other ways. But one of the impacts that the COVID pandemia has had is that many small businesses, and when we talk about ecotourism and sustainable tourism and regenerative tourism, we're talking about really personalized businesses for the most part, is that many people, many of these family members, these staff that have been with some of these companies, depending on the length of the lifetime of that company, have been there for decades. And because there is no work, many of these people had to be laid off or had to find other ways of surviving. And in the case of some businesses that have been around for a long time, they've spent a great deal of time not only knowing and loving their staff, but also training them and involving them in the philosophy and the spirit of what they're doing. And these people end up having sometimes to feed their families to move on. And so when things start to pick up a little bit, because travelers are starting to feel that they can travel with the correct amount of protection, they're sometimes finding businesses without their key players or without their complete holistic offering. And that has a tremendous impact on the educational and learning of what they're doing. And at the Global Ecotourism Network, which I'm the chair of, and I'll put the link down here in a second, we believe that all tourism should be educational tourism. That when the clients leave that place, they have gained a tremendous amount of knowledge about everything from biology to local customs to how to tread lightly and how to keep a community thriving without trashing it. So when you're arriving at a place that has lost a tremendous amount of its family due to this, you're getting a kind of staccato offering in some cases, and I think that's one of the impacts. But in conclusion, I do think that it's I think there will be a vaccine, and that will regenerate, this is the word of the day today, more tourism, and hopefully we will have a great deal more understanding of how people need to tread on our planet, and we'll have a much more spiritual connection with what they have and admire it.
Great, really appreciate that, Glenn. Kyle, let's jump over to you in terms of kind of shed some perspective from your position.
Yeah, and I'll try not to repeat what other people have said because I agree with what everyone else has said, and there's a bit of that going on with us too. Especially, we work with a lot of different partners throughout Latin America, and all of them are, experiencing downturns, no bookings, no revenue right now. Our approach has been more to look at it from what opportunities do we have now that we didn't have before. And because we also build software and technology specifically designed for operators and guides in emerging markets, this is an opportunity for them to really focus on not only kind of changing the products that they may have to offer and the way that they offer them, but also the way that they do business, right? The way that they actually receive reservations, the way that they are able to put themselves on different, the thousands of different marketplaces online, right? Like there are technology resources that have been lacking in these places for a really long time that have prevented them from getting the type of distribution that they should be getting and that people would rather them get, because a lot of people want to do really authentic things. It's just really hard to find and book them online. So the ability to be able to receive payments online, which is a health concern, but also it is a business boom for them, kind of enabling that kind of digital transformation in a way that's sustainable for them, right? Not just taking what's going on in the States and in Europe, right? And saying, oh, here's the software, try to use this, but really building it in a way that integrates with the way that they're already living and doing their work is what we've been focused on and been getting support to do.
Great, Kyle. Really appreciate that. That's a nice perspective. I want to circle back to the panelists now with kind of a follow-up from my perspective, and that's, we've talked about how important it is to recognize sustainable travel, looking at that regenerative travel might even be, in many people's eyes, obviously a notch up and actually kind of the rebirth or refreshing of natural and cultural iconic destinations and resources. But we also know that with the pandemic, we've seen in travel and tourism easily a minimum of 100 million jobs lost. And they may not come back, and certainly not come back anytime soon. The economic realities have been so stark, whether it's in Colorado, in Costa Rica, or wherever. My question to each of you is, how realistic is it for us to be able to expect our partners in destinations and communities, whether it's the Front Range or in Talamanca in Costa Rica, to be able to maintain the high standards and to continue to commit to sustainable tourism practices and actually even aspire and achieve what one might consider regenerative travel. So is there is the risk real of relaxing standards? Are you seeing this now? Is it just going to be almost, in some measure, I'll use these kind of crass terms, an eat what you kill mentality amongst operators and such, that where they'll take any tourist, they'll relax and soften any kind of protocols and what have you. I'm not talking about COVID safety now. I'm talking about managing natural and cultural resources. Is that an issue? Have any of you seen this in place, or do you see a redoubling? What's been the response that you've seen, and how promising is it? Let me open it up. Who would like to does anyone have any particular thoughts on that? Just raise your hand if you do.
Say, if I can start.
Okay, sure thing, Andrea.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I get a much larger sense of partnership between everybody right now. I think the reality is, whether it's a destination, whether it's a tour operator, a booking platform, a hotel, a restaurant, we all just want to make it. So I really, the outreach, the partnership, the ways people are working together, I think it's better than it's ever been. Really, people, I think, are much more focused on the greater good at this point for everybody. That's my experience. I'd love to hear from the rest of you.
Yeah, other thoughts, guys? Do you agree? Have you seen what Andrea's talking about, or do you have a different experience? Obviously, it's not one size fits all, but anybody?
Can I go?
Yes, of course.
Yep. I can see the same as Andrea. Specifically with rural communities, what we see is that they are very resilient. Tourism is not the only source of income, so they are doing okay during the pandemic, and it's an opportunity to innovate in their offer, to attract those travelers that are looking for culture, conservation, authenticity, and wellness. So, and trying to work with other communities and with other stakeholders within the industry to achieve that. So I think that's a positive impact of the pandemic, at least for communities.
Okay, Glenn, I'll give you just one quick comment, and then I need to move on because there's a third interesting question I want to raise to the panel. Okay, Glenn, go ahead quickly.
Yeah, no, just that I think that there has been innovation because people are really feeling that they need to find different outlets to survive. And I think there's been a greater, an increase in empathy amongst business owners because they've seen what damage they've been living in for the last many months. But on the other side of the coin, there's also those groups, the small tourism entities, ecotourism groups, have always worked on the margin because of the level of income that they can obtain through small personalized service. And when they were doing well, they could apply some of that extra energy, money, and interest into improving and innovating environmental areas in their philosophy. And this has been diminished because they don't have the means, nor the time, nor the emotional energy sometimes to do that. So I think that there's things on both sides, but I do think when you have something like a certified sustainable policy like Costa Rica has and Australia has, you have this bonding of homogeneous small businesses that are really combining their efforts to help each other, sustain each other, buying product from each other. My coffee, for instance, and I'm not only a hotelier, I also have a coffee business. I'm finding that there's new hotels, some hotels that are opening again after this, who are now wanting to buy my coffee that didn't before because they want to support a sustainable organic business.
Great. Well, we're certainly hearing that strong sense of innovation, community, partnership. I mean, these are good human society attributes that I think we're seeing now. Third question for the panel, and I want to make sure we have enough time so each of you can respond here. So, in what ways do you demonstrate your commitment and responsibility to equity and access so that sustainable travel options do not only become accessible to a privileged few, that all important avoidance of travel just becoming for the rich and elite? So again, Andrea, let's stay in our original order. Give you the first crack at that. How have you been looking at this from an equity and access perspective?
It's, for us, actually, it's a little bit of a two-part question. Colorado, what we've always been very proud of is that we do have experiences regardless of your budget. And we've always sold it that way. If you want to do a hiking and camping trip that will cost you very little money, there is no place better than Colorado for that. However, if you want that high-end luxury experience, we have that too. So, Colorado really is accessible to all, especially for families and the different experiences you can have. My family, I'm not a Coloradan by birth. My family used to come out here and go camping, and I guarantee you my family didn't have much money. But what we've also been, so the second part of the question really does come down to getting back to that regenerative travel a little bit, and how we promote, because we continue to, and on our website, I'll put a link up there in a minute, we continue to create itineraries, is the word, sorry, accessibility was in my head. We continue to create accessible itineraries, and by accessible, we mean not just from an income level, but also for disabilities. We're creating educational itineraries. I believe I heard one of you mention the educational aspects of tourism. Of course, we have the sustainable itineraries, and we also have towns that are doing some amazing things. I'm going to mention Aspen because they actually just yesterday launched something where they have artworks that are designed to make people feel better and get them into that next space toward innovation. And how do we essentially, how do we make ourselves better people, really is the purpose of the installation. So it doesn't cost any money to go see that. So yeah, we're approaching it from many different angles. And sorry, I'm going to leave everybody else time here too. So.
Terrific, thanks. I'm going to jump over to Kyle because I kind of left you out on that last round, so I'm going to change the order a bit up. So Kyle, if you wouldn't mind addressing that question of how you're approaching both commitment and responsibility to equity and access.
Yeah, of course. I think that what Andrea said was really good, and I think it's about keeping options open and being flexible. I think for us, we really are thinking about again, it's about where our focus is. We think if we focus on the supply side and focus on the operators and guides that typically haven't had access to the right types of resources, in order to market themselves more broadly and more widely, we feel like we open up more direct connections to travelers that makes it cheaper for travelers to be able to access those types of experiences, as opposed to having to go through a very high-end guide that happens to have the access to this indigenous village because they're the only person that's been willing to go out to that village to talk to them and form the relationship necessary in order for them to be able to bring travelers in, right? So driving a more direct connection between the actual operators, guides, local communities, indigenous, rural, and the travelers that want to visit them and experience those things I think is really the way to make sure that this type of travel is very inclusive. And so it starts with being inclusive on the supply side, and then you can get to be inclusive on the demand side.
Terrific. That's great. Felipe, how are you finding it from your perspective at Sumai Travel?
I agree with Kyle. We need to shorten the supply chain within the industry. We need to create mechanisms that allow travelers to go directly with local suppliers, local communities, or at least only one intermediary. And this will make it more accessible in terms of price. At the same time, we need to look at the quality standards. So I think we can do both. We can keep quality and give a fair price to travelers. Apart from that, I want to circle back into the social enterprise model, which happily is becoming more and more popular within the tourism industry. Social enterprises don't have profit maximization as the primary goal. We try to balance profit maximization with other goals, such as generating positive impact at local level, or depending on the industry you work in, creating other types of impact. I think this benefits travelers as well, because when you work with a company that's not worried only about your money, they're going to give you a fair price. They're going to give you a better product, and ultimately everyone will be happier.
Wonderful. Glenn, from your perspective, thoughts to complement what Andrea, Felipe, and Kyle have offered?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all great stuff and really important to digest. I might, maybe if you let me, I'll go through a little bit more to the business side of this. Tourism is a business, and our business is, bringing people unforgettable experiences and educating them so they leave perhaps more sensitive and better than they were before. But sometimes the perfect is the enemy of the good, as they say. What people concern themselves about when they talk about tourism businesses is price. And I think it's a really faulty logic and not a good direction to go in. I don't think it's ever about price. I think it's about value. And if you satisfy or exceed the expectations of your clients, they'll never take price really into too much consideration, because they're looking for experiences that are going to be at least as valuable as they hoped, and more so if possible. So when you have in Costa Rica, for instance, we think of ourselves as a cluster of places. 90% of the hotels in our country are less than 40 rooms. So almost the entire country is a personalized experience. And we have everything from backpackers to the extraordinarily expensive experience hotels, and everything in between. But I think what we have in common is that people are left, one, with a great environmental and educational experience, aside from the sheer fun of it. And secondly, that there's very little leakage of that money leaving the country. It usually goes right back into the community. It gets recycled back into the place which the business is located. And that has a great deal of impact on the local communities. And as my great friend Judy Kefergona from Kenya once told me, a good place to live is a good place to visit.
that is, I think, a tremendous kind of closing statement that we will use. I don't have any other pearls of wisdom to offer at this moment. Why don't we complete our panel discussion at this point, and now make sure that we can open up for some questions from our participants. So Andrea, Felipe, Glenn, and Kyle, thank you so much. And let's open up for questions. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the live Q&A portion of this panel. We have some of our panelists back who are able to join us again to answer some of your questions. And I have the pleasure of facilitating that. So I'm going to drag you into this, Greg, too, and ask that you answer some of these questions from your experience. So we had a question from Caleb Padilla where he says, what would be the recommendation to create new natural places such as natural parks in cities? So as we start to think about tourism at the city level and encouraging people to recreate and find tourism spaces in their own home cities. So I'll open that up to anyone if you want to raise your hands and provide some thoughts on that. Yeah, go ahead.
Was that for me?
Yeah,
Greg?
sorry.
Oh, okay, great. No, it's a terrific question. And, you know, one of the things that I think we need to remember is that most people actually live in urban or suburban settings. Certainly in the United States, 8 out of 10 residents live in that kind of setting. And one of the things that I think this question really underscores is that we need more public lands. We need more open space for people to connect with nature, to establish that human-nature bond. And in fact, I'm a very strong proponent and have been my entire career of what I'll call nearby nature. Nature that is accessible, nature that is something that you can get out and see and feel and touch and don't necessarily have to make a very long distance trip. And I think we're seeing this right now about how urgent nearby places are to wherever we are, you know, quarantining in place or staying at home much more. And so the desire to have more public lands, more public parks and things is very important, and actually going to be even more important for our health and well-being moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I see that here in Colorado. I wonder, Andrea, if you could speak to that. I think as a state that prides itself on outdoor recreation, we definitely see that, and even more so now during the pandemic.
Yeah, well, it actually doesn't address the question specifically because it's talking about urban areas, but we did just christen last week our 42nd state park. So we're always looking for new areas. But within the city, you know, I will say it really has to happen if you have a parks department. You know, for us, we've been very fortunate that we've always had administrations in place that also want that natural beauty, lots of biking and walking spaces, there's little pocket parks everywhere. But I think you can work on your parks department or some local entity that's similar to the more people that speak, it happens. So, you know, find a community effort to do it.
And Glenn or Felipe, yeah, it looks like Glenn, you'd like to say something?
Yeah, I just think it's a great attribute to any city to have a park, an urban setting where you can enjoy nature. But I think it's also very critical that for those who are thinking about or contemplating the idea of creating such a park or a preserved area, to consider the sustainability of that. That you should have endemic or native species growing there. There should be a very strong and robust kind of information booklet for people to understand about not feeding animals, what kind of animals live there, and not to introduce foreign or non-native species into that environment, because otherwise you don't have the kind of ecology that you need in order for that to continue growing and sustaining itself as a natural habitat.
I think that's a very good point. Felipe?
Something I've seen working very well is when local municipalities or local governments partner with NGOs or community groups, and they create volunteer programs where locals gather together to do reforestation, to clean some area, to do regeneration, taking into account that comment that Glenn just made, that endemic species and good planning. And at the end, it can be open as a park within the city, and there is a sense of belonging.
Yeah, and I know we're just. Oh, go ahead, Greg.
No, I'm sorry. There was a little delay. One of the things I just want to underscore, just to give a specific example, look at New York City. Huge city, very urban. Central Park in New York City has more species of birds than the UK or Jamaica. And when you think about that for a moment, 800 to 900 acre park in the city of millions of people, and yet still you could technically see, and these are all native species that are either migratory or resident. That's a pretty extraordinary statement, which means that the urban park, that nearby nature, can be a significant resource for visitors that come to that city so that they don't have time, but they can go visit, which is an important element, and it enhances the bigger experience that they have. Someone coming into San Jose, Costa Rica, and being able to take advantage of the parks there, and then going out to Glenn's operation, for example, they're going to see a nice juxtaposition of different experience. I'm putting a little plug in for you, Glenn.
Thank you very much.
But it's really true, and it's true if you were coming into New York City and then going up north into the Adirondacks, for example, in the state of New York. So the point is that there are resources and opportunities to diversify the experience if you build in parks and as part of the landscape everywhere.
Yeah. And I just want to ask one more question before we wrap up here, because I know we're going over time a little bit. But I think as the biennial, one of our most impactful programs, and this is a question that we grapple with, is that we plan trips across different destinations in this hemisphere, and we bring together people. We have people come to Denver for various festivals and trips that we organize. So how can we continue as an organization to promote sustainability while also recognizing that the power, that power of travel and cultural exchange and creating regenerative practices into our business model? So this is a sort of a personal question, I think, as the biennials, we continue to be conscious of our impact in a organization that does promote travel.
Wants to tackle that?
The big question.
Well, I can take a stab to begin our conversation.
Go ahead.
One of the things that we're seeing in the current situation, and I would certainly encourage the biennial to be responsive to this, and that is to look towards what a responsible recovery is going to look like, locally, hemispherically, and ensure that you and your own operations respond to those realities. And I think that those are built around a number of different kind of elements. One is to be better at planning. And in part of that is to ensure that you've got the kind of risk management, both understanding and tolerance of. And when I say that, for example, you're bringing people in and out, you're designing trips, need to be responsive of that. Second kind of element there, which I would encourage you to think about, is how you include more directly adaptation and resilience. And I'm talking about this from a climate change perspective, of course, but also from an operations and education perspective to ensure that your programs can withstand that kind of uncertainty, but also that you're able to adapt. So those would be a couple of things that I would just share for you to think about.
I would add to have a written policy or at least guidelines for economic linkages, that when you organize events or seminars, you could make sure that all products are sourced locally whenever it's possible, and maybe have some sustainability standards for those products. So all that money spent on organizing the event or traveling will have a positive impact.
There's actually ways, we have a conference that we do every year. We do our governor's conference, the governor of the state of Colorado, but it is our tourism conference, and one of our goals, and we've done it for the last 3 years, although last year was virtual, but we do a zero waste conference. So everything's compostable, recyclable. We've even stayed at places where the energy used, somehow it's either coming from solar or doing something else. So we can also make choices about where we stay and what we do when we're in certain locations.
Thank you. This is very informative, and I think we're taking advantage of this panel to support our own mission. So we appreciate. Glenn, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I would just say that from my experience over 30 plus years of being in ecotourism and sustainable tourism, I would recommend that people, particularly if we're talking from a business point of view, either as a tour operator or outbound or a hotel or whatever, that the most important criteria for determining how you are going to tread through the business world and have some kind of success cannot be based on solely and most importantly your sustainability. That is not a winning combination. People are looking for quality and unforgettable experiences, and that has to be completely shrouded in sustainability and responsibility. It has to be packed into everything that you offer. But to just offer sustainability as your number one key attribute then defies and defeats the most important attribute that people want to have, and that is to have an experience that they'll never forget. And the quality of the brand and of the product is so important. And that quality is dependent a great deal on many factors, but particularly on how you tread on the planet and what your mission and objective is.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And we appreciate the time of all of you for joining us on this panel and this conversation. And to our participants and those who joined on YouTube and Facebook, we thank you so much for joining us. And as we wrap up this, as our second panel today on the Sustainable America Summit, and we hope you'll join us again tomorrow for another full day of programming as we continue this conference. Thank you all so much, and we hope you have a lovely Monday afternoon. Goodbye, everyone.
Appreciate it, Robin. Nos
Thank
vemos.
you. Take care. Bye.
Ciao, ciao.